If you own a Whirlpool washing machine that has these oval lights on it and the machine's jumping around like it's in a 90s hip hop video, turning your house into a house of pain, I want to show you every single possible fix you could employ to get this to stop bouncing around. It could cause a lot of issues like your clothes not being able to spin dry as effectively as possible, as well as a lot of other annoying things. There's a few things we can do that are cheap, easy, free, and then they progress into some things that will make this machine run better than the day it came out from the factory. So let's go easiest to hardest on this machine with every fix in this ultimate guide. Let's start with some basic and free ideas first. One thing that you want to check is if the machine is level. Use a bubble leveler and make sure that everything looks proper. If it isn't leveled, it could tilt to one side, causing it not to balance correctly. Many machines of this type have legs that simply can be screwed in or out by hand, but there are others that may require a wrench to solve this issue for balancing and leveling the loads. Next, if your machine looks like this Whirlpool one with these oval lights, you can calibrate the machine without any clothes in it to try to rebalance how the machine operates in spin mode. With the unit freshly plugged in to electric and no lights on the system, rotate the central dial counterclockwise once, clockwise 3 times, counterclockwise once, and then clockwise one last time. Left, right, 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 left, right. If you do this correctly, all the lights will flash on and off like you see here. And with the lights flashing, you're going to rotate the knob clockwise 4 times. It should show the rinse light is green only, and if you press the start button, with the machine essentially ready to run, it will engage the recalibration mode. Again, make sure it's leveled and there are not any clothes in the washer. This could fix the machine in many cases. Now, if that doesn't solve it, you're going to have to repair something. Let's test the suspension rods first. Open the lid and press on the sides of the washing machine to push it down towards the ground as hard as possible. If it snaps back up into place and does not bounce around at all, the suspension rods are good. But if it bounces around up and down or left to right, the suspension system has a problem. You can do the same thing with pushing the tub to the sides. Again, if it moves around and bounces, the suspension system is bad. If it snaps back into place, it's something else that's causing your machine to go off balance. Let's assume that the problem, though, is the suspension rods. I want to show you how to replace the rods, but what's actually causing them to go bad, because a lot of people are replacing their rods from Amazon and end up not working. So let's go ahead and open the top of the washer and I'll show you what I'm talking about. First, let's go ahead and tape the lid down with masking tape. Next, there are 3 screws on the rear of the washing machine that need removed. One on the left side, one on the right side, and one that keeps the wire trunk harness covered slightly to the left. Theoretically, you could leave the machine plugged in through this step, but you probably want to shut the water supply off and unhook the washer water hoses to the machine. We're going to tilt the machine rearwards. It could result in water leaking from the drain hose if it's too short to not be able to go back into the standpipe like this one. I went ahead and lowered the hose to the bottom of the machine to the floor and let water drain into a bucket to remove the extra water. To release the lid of the washing machine, go to the front of the unit, pull the top towards you, then lift up, then rearward, which will allow you to tilt the lid up and away from the washing machine. At the rear of the unit, when you do this, there are 2 small metal tabs that the top of the washing machine can slot into that it will rest on to help keep the top secured of the unit. To remove the suspension rods from the housing, you can use a pair of pliers or slip-jawed wrench to hold the rod from underneath the top of the washer housing to push it up and then remove the hook from this retention cap. The first one wasn't quite easy to see on camera, so here's the removal of a second one. You can pull opposite corner rods at the same time so you can repair 2 at once, or you could just do 1 at a time. Here's what you would see underneath where the rod is housed, and I will tell you that some versions of these washing machines will have a slot in the tub that would let you remove the rod from the top and not have to get underneath it, but this is a little bit older of a washing machine that does not have those slots inside of it. To get the rods out, I have to close the lid, lock it in place, and then tilt the unit rearwards or to the side to remove the rods from underneath the machine. When it's tilted back, the rod could have dropped out of the housing. If not, you may have to reach up and grab it from the area that we showed just a little bit ago. In the case of this unit, I'm removing 2 rods at the same time to refurbish or replace them, but never do more than 2, and make sure you're doing them on exactly opposite sides. Otherwise, the tub will be super hard to put the rods back into. So we're at the point in the video where we're replacing the rods, or at least taking them out. And you're probably guessing at this point that I'm going to tell you just spend a bunch of money to buy new replacement rods. That's going to solve the problem. The answer is that it's more complex than you think, but also cheaper than you think potentially. The real reason that your suspension rods are bad aren't because of the mainspring that is the big part here, which we probably all assume is the cause of the issue. No, it's actually the area on the top cap cover that you see right here. Inside of this are two things that have likely gone bad, causing your issue. The first thing that is bad potentially is the big foam insert here. This can be replaced with rubber matting or different materials. This has a lower chance of degrading, but the bigger issue or problem here is when you lose the amount of damping grease that this needs to operate. If you take one of these apart, you notice there's a lot of grease that should be in here that packs and dampens the movement of the rod when it's in a high spin speed mode. And it's also a reason that I don't suggest buying third-party suspension rods from Amazon. It's why they're also poorly rated on Whirlpool washers of almost any kind, saying it only works for 2 or 3 weeks. And that's because most of the third-party rods out there do not have enough damping grease or the right amount of foam insert. What can you do about this? You can simply use any sort of damping grease to apply on the inside of the cap, and it will restore the function. The advantage with doing this is that a tub of damping grease, which this really small vial would actually work on about 3 or 4 washing machines total, this thing of damping grease runs way less expensive than a pair of new rods that are third party. If you go buy OEM rods, which is what I've always suggested, they're much more expensive, but it's because they have the right foam inserts and the right damping grease in it. So it's your choice on how to do this, if you want to spend a little bit less money and refurbish these by applying the grease, or just go out there and buy the rods. But in my opinion, the grease is way better, and it's definitely something that you should have if you are going to go buy third-party rods on Amazon or any other website. And the damping grease is fortunately universal, which is a big advantage, because if you've noticed, these rods are not the same size. So if you do need rods, I will have links to them in the description, but again, it will vary from model to model because some rods are 24 inches, some are 26, and there's about 10 different kinds in the middle, and you have to use them specific to your washer because of the tub size. So what we're going to do is go ahead and refurbish these rods, put them back in the machine, and get to the next steps. To repair the suspension rods, you need to take a very small flat-bladed screwdriver or dental pick and wedge it between the top cap of the suspension rod and the bottom part of the cap. It's a very, very tight fit and can take a little bit of effort, but they will fully separate on these types of washing machines. Once separated, you can inspect the foam piece in the lower plastic. To remove the foam from the plastic, I'm going to press the small screwdriver in to wedge the foam and then compress the spring with my fingers. This is the easiest way to get the foam out in my opinion. If the foam is bad and needs replaced, it would slide too easily on the rod. If there's some resistance, the foam damper should still be good. I'm working on creating a replacement die-cut foam for these, and I will link it in the damping grease in the comments. Otherwise, you could use something like a foam mat cut to proper size to replace this foam as needed. Again, the foam on this one is good, so what I'm going to do is just install the Bounce Be Gone damping grease and apply it to the foam insert, then the rod itself above and below the insert, as well as under the cap, because there's a reservoir for grease that pretty much all the Amazon.com rods never have, and this is why all of them go bad. I'm going to do the same thing on all the rods of this unit. If the plastic caps are okay on the washer housing, you can just add a small amount of grease to this cap and cup set. I've noticed on some brand of washing machines, they start doing this more and more often, and even this small vial of grease is enough to do this on every rod cap set. To reinsert the rods, I'm going to go ahead and tilt the washing machine backwards to access the bottom. Again, on some models, you don't need to do this, and it would be the same whether you refurbish or have fully replaced the rods. Setting the rods in place is not too tricky, but the key is to getting them in the hole and kind of set in place around the edges of the washer chassis, so when you tilt the machine down, they just don't fall out onto the floor and out of the tub itself. With the washer back on the floor and the rods in place, we need to reattach the rods to where they belong in the cup and cap set. Use the same steps previously to unhook and tilt the washer lid rearward. to attach the rod, you can use that pair of pliers again. But if you've replaced the rods in pairs, you could just use the hook on one of the spare rods to pull it up and through the cap set like you see me do here. It's even easier than using the pliers in my opinion. Depending on the cap style, it will seat in the cap and the hook will need angled 90 degrees to one side or the other so it won't fall out. You should see this when you replace your rod. You can do the same process with the second rod using the pliers. If you do two at a time, the first one that we did is going to be much harder to get reinstalled due to having so much tub weight on that single rod when you pull it up. So I think the suspension rod trip helps a lot if you're doing them in pairs. If this solved your problem, awesome. Make sure to recalibrate the machine once you've dealt with this because it will ensure the machine spins and doesn't bounce properly because the machine may have miscalibrated to the old bad rods and needs essentially reset. However, on many of these washing machines, we have found that repairing the rods or recalibrating doesn't solve all the issue because of the washing machine hub or tub problems. And these are the next two difficult things to look at that are somewhat involved. To test the hub or tub to see if it's bad, quickly rotate the tub with your hand and see if the inner partially metal basket moves to the left or right while the outer plastic basket does not. A good hub or tub system would have zero play in between each other and they would circulate perfectly with no variance to the left or right. But if your inner basket shows any movement, it's probably an issue between the hub or the tub. You could also use your hand to just push the inner tub and rock it against the sides. It shouldn't actually happen. There should be no or very little movement between this inner or outer tub. For example, this view would be like if you have a really bad tub that is the source of your issues. And again, this is becoming more frequent on these machines. It needs shored up with a new bearing or shim system in addition to the hub that's probably been worn out as well. And depending on how much you want to take on, there's a few ways to handle this. For either fix though, we're going to need to access the gear case and spline of the units, which is through the washplate or the agitator in your machine. First, take a small flat-bladed screwdriver and pry up the washplate cap in the center of the unit. If your unit had an agitator, it may have a taller removable cap with a similar nut in it. You'll take a socket wrench with a 7/16 socket and turn the screw counterclockwise in the washing machine. You probably will have to hold on to the plate or the tub when you turn the screw with the wrench. Once you have that done, removing the plate is the next step, and there are a few ways to do this depending on the difficulty of your machine. Sometimes you can just use a pair of pliers to remove the plate, but other times you will have to use a hooked tool like a trampoline spring tool, airbags, or some other device. And of course, the one that we're repairing today is the worst wash plate I've ever dealt with in the history of the channel, so we need to do a few more aggressive things. This next one tends to work pretty often. I'm going to fill the wash tub past the plate with hot water from the water supply hose that we unhooked earlier. At this step, the washer top could be pivoted back and the tub covers off, but you don't need to necessarily do that to get water in the tub. Once you have hot water in the tub, you could add CLR, citric acid, or what we use at our store, Wash Bomb, washing machine cleaner, to soak the tub in the mixture and let it sit for an hour or two to eat away at the junk that would cause the wash plate to lock in place. Instead of running a load of clothes in the unit though, what you'd want to do is re-enter that diagnostic mode we've gone through twice already. Left, right, 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 left, right. But leave it on the mode just before calibrate. You would see two lights illuminated for the cycle complete and the final spin. This is called the forced manual mode on your washing machine. You would press the start button to enter it and all the lights are going to turn off. Press the start button again and it will lock the door of the washing machine. To force the unit just to agitate and not pump your hot water wash mix out, rotate the dial counterclockwise once until you see the wash and rinse lights together and press start. This is going to force the unit just to run that wash plate and agitate with your cleaning mixture inside. Make sure the washing machine bolt is off the plate at this point. The manual mode will run for up to 5 minutes. It should simply agitate the washer plate off, and this works very often. But as a note, when you get to the end of the 5 minutes, the unit will stop running the agitation, and whatever you do, don't press the start button again. You need to re-enter the diagnostic mode that we just did, and then go back to agitation and run it again. If you would press the start/pause button, it would end up restarting the machine and it would pump the water out. So you have to go back to that diagnostic mode, or you would pause it, say 4 minutes in, and then restart it because it's still in that manual mode, and it would keep running. You can do this 2, 3, 4, 5 times to get that plate off. It works pretty well in most cases. This would allow you to remove the wash plate from the tub with a wrench. Now, if that doesn't solve it, the only other option you're going to have is to blast the gear case out from top to bottom, and that's a dangerous thing to do. You could possibly do this by replacing the 5/16 24 count transmission bolt with a taller, more durable one, and then hammer it out. You would hammer it out by releasing the gear case from under the washing machine. It's held in by either 4 or 6 10mm screws, and then you would just beat on the gear case with a hammer and socket wrench set and some extenders. I can't say I recommend this, but it works if you absolutely have no other choice, but I had to do it with this particular washing machine. Finally, you would remove the plate once it's dislodged, which would bring us to the next point in repairing the gear case and splines. Here is the hub that we need to investigate and then likely replace. We need to remove it from the unit, and to do that, you're going to put towels in the washing machine so no screws get lost when we get ready to remove them. To remove the hub, you're going to need to get the U-clip out. This can be tricky if there's a ton of rust around it. Use a small screwdriver to pry the clip away from the washer. In this case, it's locked really bad, so I had to use a bigger flat blade screwdriver. With the clip out now, you will remove 6 screws from the tub. They're extremely long, thick screws. You may want to use a screwdriver to loosen them up initially where there's a lot of torque, then use a drill gun to finish removal, because it's very time consuming to remove these by hand. Watch out for stripping them because they could be filled with rust or other debris when you pull the plate. Once you have the 6 screws out, you should be able to easily remove the hub from the tub. Once this is done, investigate the plastic hub as well as the splines of the washing machine. How do they look? Are they rusty or wore down? The first thing that I would probably do is clean the splines of the gear case in some way. You can do this with some CLR and a wire brush to remove rust if it's in really bad shape, because whatever we're going to do next will fix this machine for a very long time. Few other videos are going to show you how to do this step properly, and it's something that Whirlpool actually screwed up that caused millions of washing machines to fail because they made these parts too cheap. The next step is difficult and optional, depending on how extensive though you want to fix your machine. To do the more extensive thing, you can remove the cover of the wash tub. There are small plastic fingers around the tub cover. They're small and vary from model to model. I'm using a small plastic screwdriver to wedge in between the cover and tub, and then once you do that, you're going to unlatch the cover and remove it from the top. There are about 8 retainers around the tub, and once you get the first 2 or 3 off, it's quite easy to pull the rest after that. Another note at this point is if the cover is eaten up due to shaking damage, you may want to buy a new cover and replace it. To make sure this tutorial is super extensive, you would inspect the balance ring with the cover off at this point. This ring should not have any cracks or damage in it. They're filled with water to act as a counterbalance to when it spins. So when you stop spinning the drum by hand, you should hear water sloshing around in it too, and if not, it would be bad and needs replaced. I will have a link to where you can buy the balance rings from iFixit in the description. Now at this point, you can also see that the tub has some play in it that throws it off balance. This particular machine wasn't in terribly bad shape, but often the play's far worse, and it's in general a death sentence for your machine. If it's not that bad, you can just install the metal hub and just skip ahead a few moments in this tutorial. But at any rate, with the cover off, the hub out, and everything else clear, you should be able to pull the tub straight up and out of the unit entirely. It should be quite easy at this point if you've done everything else on the unit. With the tub out on the back side of it, this is the exact piece that is likely to cause millions of washing machines to go out of balance right in the middle. It is a cheap plastic tub bearing that Whirlpool started adding to these units about 8 years ago that really is terrible. We're going to replace it with an upgraded replacement sleeve from New Appliance Parts. To remove this sleeve, you need to use a 5/16 deep well socket, which is just wide enough to hammer the bearing out with a mini sledge. In my case, I used a Pittsburgh brand deep well socket, which worked really well. Other brands are going to work, but the key is that the socket is thick enough to go around the bearing edges, but not thick enough to go to the spokes that hold it in place with the tub. If this part seems too hard or difficult, I did invent a metal shim that you could simply wedge into the top and bottom of the bearing, which is also a little bit cheaper to buy. It's not as great of a fix, but in most cases it may be just enough. At any rate though, On this unit, I went ahead and with a few strikes, got the bearing out that you now see. This is the replacement bearing. It's a little bit shorter, but it's made out of a far heavier duty plastic than what Whirlpool includes in their washing machines from the factory. This is the core culprit of why your washing machine cannot be balanced. I can go into all the details, but essentially it wears and wallers out, and when it does that, it causes your suspension rod, hub, gear shaft, and everything else usually to wear out and fail over time if that tub is shifting from side to side. To install the new bearing, you simply line it up with the tub and press it into place based on where the spokes of the bearing are. You then need to take a 2x4 or PVC pipe that's about 1.5 inches wide and tap it into place. This was much easier to put it in than taking it out. You can see that it's flush with the bottom of the tub. And again, if this looks too difficult, you could just put the Gearcase shim in instead. This is the metal ring shim set that we personally invented that's a competing idea with the red bearing sleeve. Either repair is going to work great in my opinion. I think the red bearing is a better long-term solution, but you have to knock the bearing out, and that's up to you on whether or not you want to do that. And I will have links to both items in the description. If you simply wanted to use the shims, you would just find the thinnest one that would fit the bottom of the tub and install it by tapping it into place where the bearing is. The set that we use has 3 wall thicknesses, and generally the thinnest is going to work the best for the underside of this unit. Next, you would install the tub into the washing machine by lifting it into place. You then rotate the tub, press it firmly into place, and it may take a bit of effort to get back in, but in my experience with this unit, it wasn't that bad. Optimally, at this point, you'd use a PVC pipe with a collar on the end to press the tub and the new bearing back into place. I didn't have one custom built for this video, and I just used a 2x4, which worked quite well. Once the tub is back into place, the new bearing should sit flush with the bottom of the tub, and you should see 2 rows of Gearcase splines, top for the wash plate and bottom for the hub. It's possible that the bearing could have popped up slightly when you press the tub into place, so you may have to tap it down just a little bit. Now, if you didn't want to remove the tub to replace the bearing or the underside shim, you could have just installed one Gearcase shim at the top of the unit, which we sell and we include one of when you buy the metal hub from our store. You would place that into the Gearcase to wedge it in between the tub and the original Whirlpool bearing. The shims that we sell are not compatible with the new appliance parts bearing, but it does work with the original Whirlpool bearing, because there is a small gap in between the bearing and the Gearcase that the shim will wedge into, which will take away that side-to-side play we've talked about quite a bit in this video. Whirlpool figured out what our channel did about 1.5 years ago. Plastic hubs do not work on these machines very well in the long term, so I would replace that plastic hub with a metal one. This is the one that we make and sell on our website, and I will have links to it in the description, by the way. The footage at this point on this washer wasn't great, so here's another machine that we installed the metal hub on a few months ago. You need to install the drive block first. The threads will catch on the Gearcase shaft, and in most cases, it's not going to sit fully flush with the tub yet. You can tap it slightly with a socket if you like, but don't force it too far on. Next, you're going to install the flat metal hub. It will fit in between the ridges of the hub and the tub that you're going to see on this kind of Whirlpool washer, and it's going to kind of rest into place a little bit. Next, you want to install the stainless steel screws into the plate. Put the towels back around again so you don't lose any screws, and then install the screws to the tub. To start, you may want to use that screw gun on a very low torque setting to tighten the replacement screws down part of the way, as a screwdriver is quite tedious. Make sure that when you torque them down, do it slowly on opposing sides. This will gently raise the tub to meet the hub system as you torque it down, but make sure you finish the tightening with a screwdriver as not to strip the screws out. This is a pretty long process. Finally, you'll install the lock washer. The lip side needs to be placed down to the hub, and you can use some Loctites on the inner thread of this lock washer. A small amount will work fine. I used a little bit too much here, but at any rate, you can screw it down by hand to get it most of the way down. But to fully lock this in place, it requires a TB123 spanner wrench. The lock nut has 4 small grooves in it that will allow you to fully torque the nut down with that wrench. You can tighten it a bit more by hand with the wrench, but you need to use a hammer to tap it the final quarter of a turn around. You do not want to over tighten this, as a 3/4 or more turn will strip out part of the hub that you really want to avoid. With that all in place, we're almost done. Install the plate back to the washing machine, Then use Loctite on the wash plate screw. Thread it back in, use a 7/16 socket to secure the screw in place. If you took it off, replace the tub cover. You can reinstall it by aligning the small fingers and then pressing it down into place. The last steps are to lower the washing lid back and lock it into place. Align the top, pull forward, press down, then press back and lock it in. Then reinstall the screws to the rear of the washing machine like you see here. And then there's one last step. We already mentioned it before though. If you install the hub or the tub bearing or anything else in the machine, I want to remind you to recalibrate it with no clothes on the inside. Also, the thread locker that we installed takes 24 hours to fully cure. My suggestion would be to wait that amount of time before running the load of clothes in the machine, but otherwise you are now fully done with upgrading your washing machine to better than when you first bought it when it comes to the suspension system. Thank you so much for watching this very long video. We've addressed every single problem that I think could ever be thought of on this type of washing machine from Whirlpool. I will have links in the description for every single part. Remember, you don't have to do every single one of these steps, but if you did all of them or almost all of them, you would have a much better machine than what Whirlpool produces today, because we've essentially returned it to what the machine was like 15 years ago when it came out. The metal hub was actually what they used to put on them before they cheaped out with plastic. I hope this video informed you and helped you and hopefully solved your issue, because this problem has probably sent millions of washing machines at the landfill at this point, and this solution is going to solve a lot of waste and junk in our environment, which I like. Please support the channel by buying from us, because again, Amazon does not have the right quality parts for the suspension rods or the metal hub. We produce that ourselves, and the new appliance parts is the one that provided the red bearing, which we distribute as well as they do. So I'll have links even to them as well. Although, have a great day.